everyone. Today it is once again at that time of the year, which means it is time for my top 10 recommended premium ships to grind during 2021. I tend to do this in January and I've had a lot of requests for an updated one. Before I start, however, there are a few disclaimers I need to go through because, well, last year's list, while was maybe even perhaps too good. my last year's list ended up being such a accurate description of which ships are powerful that Wargaming have either removed or are going to remove 6 out of 10 ships on the list. What this means is that Wargaming are basically making it impossible to acquire these premiums that are on my list. Now, obviously when I make these lists, I always want to recommend ships that you can actually get, that you can access. You can buy them either with real money or with steel or coal or free XP. Basically, you have a way of actually acquiring them. And that's why I never feature ships like Musashi, where Musashi is of course a stupidly powerful ship, but Musashi hasn't really been available for a long time in any feasible way, so it doesn't make my list. Why is this relevant? Well, because last year I featured a bunch of ships on my list, and they are being removed in the upcoming patches. Now, in patch 0.10.1, now keep in mind, the way patches work in World of Warships is that 0.x.0 comes out in January, 0.x.1 comes out in February, 0.x.2 in March, and so forth, and usually then you get 11 and 12 patches sometime in December. One early in December, the other one late in December. That's usually how patches go. They kind of correlate to the months roughly. So, in 0.10.1, which predictably will be in February, they will be removing the Massachusetts, the Alaska, the Georgia, the Thunder, and the Småland. Now, out of those 5 ships, 4 were on my recommended list for last year. The Småland kind of surprised me, but I mean the Småland is a really powerful ship, and I think because of how much we've seen it in comp, because they quoted the reason for its removal is the popularity, but it hasn't really been that popular in random battles until we saw it a ton in competitive, and after that Wargaming decided, yep, we're removing this one as well. So all of those ships are really powerful, and there's no reason really not to pick them up. Especially the ones I recommended, Massachusetts, Alaska, Georgia, Thunder. These are all monsters, as you can, well, there's some gameplay of this featuring right now. And just because they're being removed from the list, or just because they're not featured on this year's list, doesn't mean that they've suddenly gone bad. No, the reason I'm not featuring them is because they will only be available basically the first month of 2021, and after that you're not going to get access to them. So if you can get those are still highly recommended. And in 0.10.2, they're removing another one from the list, which is the Summers. So Summers will also be gone. Summers isn't quite as powerful anymore, mostly because Holland exists, but it is still a fantastic ship. And obviously, no harm done if you've gotten that one. But I wouldn't say it has quite the same urgency, especially since it's patch 10.2, which means probably only coming out in March. Smolensk, which was my most highly recommended premium, well, it competed with the Thunder, basically. I had them both as 1 and 2 kind of shared spot. That Smolensk has also been removed. So that means we basically have to redo most of our list. On last year's list I also had the Bayard, but that thing got nerfed hard by the IFHE changes, so it's actually not being featured this year. That doesn't mean that the ship is bad. Bayard is still a very good ship, it's just quite difficult to play, but the IFHE changes have made it less powerful because, well, all that incredible power that you used to have is kind of gone. Well, a big part of it has gone out the window because you can't just spec IFHE and still burn everything down. You kind of have to make up your mind which one you want. So I just wanted to get this disclaimer out of the way that when you see this video, I'm posting it in January, you still have roughly a month to pick up a bunch of the ships from my last year's list. My last year's list is very relevant still. They haven't really changed much because Wargaming doesn't really nerf premiums. Only mechanics changes come in. So you can still go back and look at my 2020 list, and basically everything there is still extremely relevant and extremely valid. But because these ships will be removed in a month or two, there is no point for me to recommend them because, well, someone's going to watch this in March, and then if I feature the same ships, he's going to be like, well, half of this list is useless because I can no longer get these ships. So this list is intended for the entire year. Another disclaimer though, because there is a Captain Rework coming, I do try to take into account how the Captain Rework is changing things, but since Wargaming has been kind of haphazard with how they're designing the Captain Rework, there might be some weird new skills or some skills being changed, not coming out the way they are basically portraying them right now, and in that case I will be forced to make an updated list, because obviously having a list for the entire year that ends up being inaccurate would be silly, and I wouldn't stand for it, so I would make an updated list if that would happen. But that's up to Wargaming's Captain Rework and how exactly they manage to balance that one, which very much remains to be seen. Anyway, let's kick it off. We're gonna kick it off with the Tier 10 French Premium Bourgogne. Now, before this, I do want to highlight that the order in which I present these ships isn't some kind of ranking like, oh, number 8 is better than number 7 and number 5 is worse than number 4 and so forth. No, these are just 10 premium ships that I recommend because I think they are powerful and they will also be powerful in the upcoming rework or commander skill rework. Like last year I ranked the Bayard above the Alaska. That doesn't mean I think the Bayard is a better ship than the Alaska, just because I put it at number 8 and Alaska at number 9. Just getting that out of the way, because people always tend to go, oh, this ship is number 1, that means it must be the best of all of these. That's not how it works. It's 10 ships I recommend. Right, the Bourgogne. 380mm guns, which is obviously a weakness. I mean, not being able to match 27mm plating is always going to be a weakness. However, on the flip side, the reload on these guns is extremely good at 28 seconds, which of course you can enhance further by running the reload upgrade as well as the main battery reload booster, which is what really makes this ship stand out. It's also one of the fastest battleships in the game. With engine boost and the Sierra Mike flag, you can do 38.6 knots with this thing. You can technically, it does have some secondary range, but obviously you don't want to build a ship like this for secondaries, because one of the greatest weaknesses of the Bourgogne is the fact that it completely lacks health and armor. I would say this is a fairly high skill cap ship to play, because it requires a lot of repositioning, a lot of smart usage of the map, so not really the easiest ship to play. This is not a Thunder where you can just sit in the middle and shoot everything in sight. It requires a lot more thought to it, and it requires some very intelligent ammunition choices as well, which, for example, this engagement with the Yamato will show you. We shoot HE, he damage guns, we pop the reload booster to guarantee a fire, then we use our great concealment. The concealment is 13.2 to disengage. You'll see it coming up while I talk. The AA wise, the AA is actually surprisingly good. I mean, it is French, but for example, the continuous damage on mid-range to up to 3.8 km range is 519. Even the long-range AA is 188, and it pumps out a total of 8 flak. So you can get a lot of AA damage out of this thing, and generally it's rather survivable against carriers. I mean, to the extent that a battleship can be survivable. It also has a surprisingly good torpedo belt of 44% when you're running all the upgrades and modules. So this means that as long as you're smart about your positioning, you can mitigate the issues of only having 74.7k health. 74.7k health is not a lot, because most other tier 10 battleships have 20, 25, even 30k more health than you do. So you are by far the squishiest of the lot, and all the armor is basically 32mm, which means of course Yamato here overmatches us easily, and you can see just how squishy this ship is once the shells start hitting it. The low health pool really hurts it. But once again, it's stupidly fast, and the firing angles are great. So for example, this situation that the Yamato finds himself in, I shot HE, he started a fire, he damage conned, I popped reload booster to guarantee a fire, turned around, he tried to push, gave too much of that nose citadel, so I punished it, and now he's trying to catch up to Bourgogne. You can just see how fast this thing is, and kiting away with these great firing angles, shooting HE backwards. This thing is extremely painful to deal with. And keep in mind that in the Captain rework, the Bourgogne is obviously going to be a prime candidate for speccing the Dead Eye skill, which improves your dispersion by 10%, which kind of mitigates one of the greater weaknesses of these guns, and that is the dispersion. It only has 1.8 sigma for the 12 guns, and being able to tighten down this already pretty decent dispersion even tighter means that the Bourgogne is going to be really, really powerful, especially with the HE at range. Not exactly perhaps the direction we'd want the game to move in, but Bourgogne absolutely gets my recommendation. Not the easiest battleship to play, but a very strong one, always has been, and in the upcoming Commander skill rework, I think this ship will be even stronger. Just a tough ship to deal with. And at number 9, we have the Cossack. Once again, number 9, not rank 9. This isn't really a set-in-stone ranking, just 10 really, really good premiums. The Cossack is pretty unique. The torpedoes, you only have 4 of them, but they hit quite hard and they have very good range. But you can of course do some gimmicks because it is a Royal Navy destroyer, which means that you can launch them one at a time. Cossack's handling is basically god tier. When I mean basically god tier, well, I'm gonna bump into this island here. The idea is to slow my speed down. Here's an example of some of the gimmicks you can pull off with these torpedoes. And what I'm doing here is, of course, I'm gonna launch 3 single launch torpedoes, smoke up, and then I'm gonna save the last one. The idea here is, of course, it is a Soviet battleship, and Soviet battleships do have this tendency of damage conning instantly, so I wait until the 3 torpedoes land, because 4 torpedoes wouldn't be enough to kill him, I think. I land the 3, and then I launch 1 additional, trying to hit the nose to guarantee a flood, while at the same time shooting the superstructure to start fires. And this brings us on to the next point of the Cossack. The firepower is amazing. It basically only loses to, I think, the Akizuki when it comes to tier 8 gunpowder, and when it comes to fire starting capacity, it is one of the best of the tier. These 8 guns start so many fires, it will actually, well, it'll straight up surprise you how good this ship is at burning down enemy ships. You should absolutely not underestimate the firepower. It does have some downsides, like the 4th turret has very, very poor firing angles, which means that you have to provide a lot of broadside. In fact, Cossack is probably one of the hardest to play ships on this list. I kind of hesitated to include it, but I feel like it must be included because in the hands of a skilled player, the Cossack can be such a powerful ship. It has a lot of really unique things to it, mostly coming down to, well, the concealment first of all. 5.5 kilometers means that the only ship that it really loses to in concealment is the IGN ones, and that's by 100 meters. That's the Asashios, the Kageros, and so forth. And of course those you can outgun very comfortably. No, the other gimmick of this ship is really the handling. Whereas most of destroyers, when they turn, they lose about 15 to, I think, is it 20% of their speed when they're turning. This is very common. The Cossack actually doesn't have this. Cossack loses less than 2% of its speed when it's turning if you're going full speed. And this means that even though the actual speed with the speed boost and the flag is only about, I think, 39 knots, in effective combat and while effectively dodging, Cossack is faster than basically all of them. It is stupidly good. It handles like an absolute god. It has a great turn rate. I think only the Lightning has a better turn rate, and it has a very small turning radius of 610 meters. This, of course, remember that it doesn't, because it's a Royal Navy destroyer, it also has the built-in acceleration bonus. So even if another destroyer was running the acceleration module, Cossack would still accelerate 25% faster. So when it comes to handling, this thing is basically the king of tier 8 handling. It is, of course, very squishy though. 18,000 health. You don't really have any special survivability gimmicks going. Your AA is a joke. You have no heal, and you have no special armor plating that can protect you against shells. But provided you play this ship well, provided you utilize this concealment and this handling, this thing can be an absolute beast. And what it of course does best is hunt other DDs. This is what it is so good at. You note that my Hydro seems to have a ridiculously long duration, and that is because if you run the Hydro module and the flag, you can actually extend hydroacoustic search duration to almost 4 minutes. And it's only a 3-kilometer hydro, so obviously not useful for offensive or cap contesting, but it is incredibly good at closing the distance with enemy destroyers, because it spots out all the torpedoes well in advance, and because of the absolutely ridiculous handling of this ship, you really have to mess up to eat torpedoes. And this combination, and also it has the Royal Navy smokes, which reload, they last for a short duration, which of course means that you can't utilize the guns maybe as much as you want, but it's exceptionally good for these hunt down enemy DD, engage, smoke up, gun him down, and then basically disengage once while the smoke is fading. Also, fast reloading quick smokes are much better against carriers, because if carrier planes come in, it's nice to be able to smoke up and not feel like you just wasted a third of your smoke consumables. Cossack is, I would say, probably on this list one of the harder ships to play, but in the hands of a skilled player, Cossack can be brutally effective. You see the, of course, very poor firing angles here, but combined with RPF, knowing exactly where the Benson is, with Hydra protecting me, knowing I will always get the jump on him, there is no doubt in my mind that I can easily just chase this ship down. I have to give a fair bit of broadside to use all my guns, but the firepower that you can put out with this ship is very effective. Keep in mind though that the shell velocity is poor, in fact even poorer than Benson's shells, so once again, you need skilled aim and skilled hands to make this premium ship shine. In the 8th place, I have the German cruiser Mainz. Now, Mainz is already pretty unique in the sense that Mainz has absolutely ridiculous damage. It's probably one of the best German premiums released basically since the T61. The AP DPM on it is completely ridiculous. I think it was 480. Basically, it completely outmatches anything else at tier 8. And while as the HE DPM isn't quite as high, it is a German cruiser, which means that the Mainz actually gets quarter pen, which means that the HE doesn't need IFHE, it pens 38 millimeters, which means that while I'm shooting something like in North Carolina, we're getting tons and tons of pens, while at the same time setting as many fires as something like a Kutuzov. So this means that Mainz basically wants to shoot. It has some downsides. It has light cruiser armor. The armor can be trollish at close range with the icebreaker and such, but in general the ship is quite squishy and it is quite slow and fairly easy to target. Regardless, you always want to be shooting at this thing. Shoot. And this is one of the reasons why I already recommend it right now, but I think it's going to be even more powerful in the upcoming Commander skill rework, because you're going to be able to run skills like Demo Man, which increases your maximum HE damage by 10% at the cost of nerfing your acceleration. Nerfing your concealment, and you're going to be able to spec straight A artillerist, which gives you 8% reload if an enemy ship is detected within the base detectability of your ship. This is basically the no conceal build I talked about in my cruiser commander rework commentary, and what this means is that you abandon concealment and you just go full gunboat. Shooting all the time, and this fits the Mainz perfectly. What this means is that the Mainz will in effect in the next patch have 10% harder hitting HE, which already bumps it up the ridiculous HE, and it's also going to have 8% reload. And in things like Mainz, like I'm running in this, not Mainz, the Captain Gunther Lutyens, which gives you additional reload, and the level of damage that you can put out in the Mainz becomes completely ridiculous. 6 km hydro, good torpedoes. The AA is okay. I mean, you don't expect anything special out of it, but the sheer damage output is what made the ship so recommended, and you're going to be able to bump it up even higher in the upcoming Commander rework. Mainz absolutely gets my recommendation, not just because it's good now or the upcoming skills favor it, but it's also a very fun ship to play. And in the fact that you don't really need any sort of special captain for it, you don't need IFHE like you often need on light cruisers, especially the upcoming rework. You're not even going to need concealment. In fact, you're going to be able to probably spec your Gunther Lutyens exactly the same on the Mainz as you're speccing it on the Hindenburg, because the Hindenburg also loves this similar kind of playstyle. Keep in mind, because you don't no longer need to spec a concealment module, you can spec for better maneuverability in the 5th slot in the upcoming patch. So this means you can basically be running rudder shift and acceleration, which will greatly mitigate one of the biggest weaknesses of the ship, which is the poor handling. It's still a very squishy ship, provided you get hit, but that doesn't mean that the damage output doesn't make it absolutely hilarious at times, as you probably gotten an idea from this game here. Mainz, not ranked 8th on my list, but absolutely one of my recommended premiums. As my 7th ship, I have the Ohio. Now, the Ohio is fundamentally a Montana with some significant and important changes. First, the main guns. Instead of the 12 guns of the Montana, you instead have 8 guns. 457mm guns, which means of course that you're capable of overmatching 30mm of plating, which is especially valuable when dealing with enemy cruisers. 8 guns means of course 4 less guns than Montanas, though, so you do pay for it. You do get slightly better reload in return, so I do consider it a net benefit. You also have significantly better secondaries, capable of reaching is at 11.5 km range, and you have the improved American dispersion on the secondaries, which means that you don't actually have to spec manual secondaries. You can, of course, especially in the Captain rework, when they will be a bit easier to get, but you can go full secondary build without even building for secondaries, or, well, you can build tank build and still benefit from having the secondary armament of the Ohio. It is slower than the Montana, and it does have less AA, but the turrets also turn faster, and of course bigger caliber also means better penetration, and it does have better rudder shift as well, which is one of Montana's great weaknesses. That doesn't mean that the Ohio handles like magic, but it does handle slightly better. The heal is not Montana's heal. Montana's heal reloads slower, but heals significantly more. Overall, Ohio's heal fits its playstyle much better, because you do find yourself pushing in and generally trying to brawl, because you do want to benefit from the secondaries, and for this, having the faster heal and the secondaries just fits the Ohio's playstyle much better than it would the Montana's, which does try to disengage from time to time. Ohio is strong. However, if you're expecting to see identical gun performance to the Thunder with these 457mm guns, you will be disappointed. Don't get me wrong, I think the guns are good, but these are not Thunder's ridiculous dispersion good. There are times when I wanted to just tear out my hair because the guns refuse to send the shells where I'm aiming, and that's actually the current clip, and one of the reasons I included it is because of how hilariously trollish the dispersion can be at time. Omagami should be an easy kill. I overmatch all his armor, he's way too close, like he should be the easiest kill ever, but when dispersion says no, dispersion really says no in this ship. So it's not the end all like overpowered monster, but I do consider it simply a significantly better Montana. I think the Ohio is straight up an upgrade, but 8 guns with this dispersion, well, sometimes it can be a very frustrating experience. I do want to highlight that the Citadel of course sits very low, which does aid it in brawling situations, because you can do all sorts of dumb things, like hoping that you can get 4 Citadels here and instead only get 2 because one of them shatter, and survive, because your Citadel sits so low in the water. So Ohio is very much geared for brawling. It does it quite well. Extremely fast turret burst, secondaries heal, and a fairly trollish Citadel. And if forced to, especially if you're running Halsey like I am here, you get the improved reload from the Confederate, and of course you get the improved expert loader, which means that, well, chasing around after an Ohio that's kiting away with secondaries blazing, HE loaded, can actually be a very frustrating experience, as this poor Yamato is about to find out. He obviously has to chase me, the game is about to end, we've secured ourselves a nice lead, Could potentially go for Citadel still, but honestly, I'm just gonna go for the guaranteed hits with the HE. His overmatch hurts, but it does have that improved deck armor, so the further I kite away, the less effective his AP will be. And of course, maintaining this kind of angling, he will struggle. Secondaries start fires, main guns add to the mix, and this Yamato finds himself going down very, very quickly. Ohio deserves its place on last year's list, and it deserves its place on this list. As my 6th ship on the list, I have the Marceau, the tier 10 French destroyer premium. It is fundamentally a Kleber hull with some very significant changes, or significant differences. The speed is still ridiculous. The ship does 55 knots with the speed flag and the speed boost, and of course, running the correct speed modules, you can easily have speed boost active, well, for the majority of the match. The guns, however, are very different. Unlike the Kleber's 139mm guns with great ballistics and great penetration, the Marceau has Colbert guns. Not the best pen, not the best HE pen either, and the shells are quite floaty, but on the other hand, the HE DPM is the highest of any tier 10 destroyer. This thing pumps out an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage, and provided it gets to farm broadsides, the AP is also very, very effective at dealing damage. Of course, Kremlin perhaps not the best example, but you get the idea. Giving broadside to the ship means a world of pain. It also has French saturation, which means dealing decisive damage to actually kill it can be very, very hard. French destroyers saturate faster than others, which means that their health pool is quite deceptive. All of this, of course, means that combined with the 7km concealment, this incredible speed and this incredible DPM means that the Marceau is excellent at hunting down enemy destroyers, well, provided it gets vision of them or manages to catch them. The damage output just makes it, well, it shreds enemy DDs, to put it simply. The AA values on it are also very good, and looking at the new upcoming destroyer skills, there are a few there which will suit it exceptionally well, like for example Fearless, which gives you 10% reload if your ship is spotted and gives you additional flak at the cost of concealment. There is more to the ship than a pure gunboat though. Unlike Khabarovsk, which if a Kaba goes low, Kaba is basically out of the match because, well, if you can't shoot, you can't do anything in the Kaba. That's not the case with the Marceau. It has 6 torpedoes on both sides. These torpedoes have 9km of range, and combined with your own 7km concealment, you can quite easily stealth torpedo ships. And of course with AR kicking in, reducing the reload, and these torpedoes being 60 knots and, well, quite fast, it means that even if a Marceau goes low HP, it still provides value as a spotter and of course a torpedo boat. So this gives it a lot more versatility than something like a Khabarovsk, which is kind of a one-trick pony. Marceau deserves its place on my list for being really good at basically everything. As my 7th ship, I have the Florida, the Tier 7 American Premium Battleship. Now, keep in mind, I'm very, very hesitant to recommend Tier 7 Premiums right now, because the matchmaking is so skewed. You tend to face Tier 9s often, so keep that in mind, that there is a high likelihood that if you play a lot of Tier 7 Premium, you will end up against Tier 9s a lot, and it doesn't really matter how powerful your ship is. That makes it very, very difficult. Florida is more of a battle cruiser than an actual battleship. The ship's armor is absolutely ridiculously squishy. We're talking no armor whatsoever. Have you ever been citadeled through the stern by a tier 5 battleship like the Piotr? Well, in the Florida, that has probably happened to you. This thing has no armor. The broadside armor is 285, the nose and stern is 25mm. So in terms of tankiness, it basically doesn't exist. You can expect to be overmatched by basically anything you face, with few exceptions. Generally speaking, if your nose into something like 356mm guns, you can angle, but 380s and larger will overmatch you. That's not what makes the Florida special though. The squishiness is absolutely a thing. It has very low HP pool. It actually has one less heal than other ships, and in the upcoming Commander rework, it's probably gonna lose another heal because you can't spec Superintendent. So expect this thing to have no healing capacity, no armor, no health, basically very, very squishy. But that's okay. Because the one thing that it does have is battle cruiser dispersion, just like, for example, the Thunder. Now keep in mind that the Thunder actually has 1.9 sigma, which synergizes extremely well with battle cruiser dispersion, whereas the Florida only has 1.7. So the guns aren't quite as incredibly accurate as the Thunder ones, but that doesn't mean that the guns aren't exceptionally accurate for a battleship, especially one with 12 guns, especially one at tier 7. The guns are 356 millimeters. You don't expect to overmatch much. The pen, once again, low caliber guns. Don't expect too much on the pen either. The HE is pretty crap. The fire chance is probably some of the worst of all tier 7 battleships. Don't expect to be burning ships to death at all. But honestly, none of this really matters because it has good speed. It has excellent AA. When I say excellent, I mean it has already some of the strongest AA in the game for a tier 7 battleship, and then you add defensive AA on top of it. Carriers generally don't want to focus you much. However, if you do get HE spammed, keep in mind that these are Bofors guns. They're gonna break under that AA pressure, and you can expect your AA to get knocked out very quickly if you're under a lot of HE spam. This once again kind of reinforces the idea that this is a cruiser. This is more of a cruiser than a battleship. You want to do things like I'm doing here, hide behind islands and take pot shots, keep the distance, utilize your concealment, which is 12.1, which is actually very good for a tier 7 battleship. Why is it recommended ship? Well, first of all, this playstyle that it already has, basically you don't want to tank, it has good concealment, it has accurate guns, and you already want to be playing, well, a fairly honestly passive playstyle, more of a cruiser than a battleship. You don't want to go in and brawling. This synergizes extremely well with the upcoming commander skill in the commander rework called Marksman, which reduces the maximum dispersion of your main battery shells by 10% if there are no visible enemy ships within the ship's base detectability radius. Do you know which ships scale extremely well but with a captain skill like that? Ships that are good long range and have good concealment. That's Florida basically described right there. So anytime someone is undetected or just not within 12.1 kilometers of the Florida gains a minus 10% dispersion buff, which is a huge thing for a ship that already has battlecruiser dispersion. So Florida is a ship that I think is already quite good now. It has its issues, mainly being, honestly, the biggest issue it has is tier 7. If it wasn't tier 7, like if it was scaled up to another tier, it would be a guaranteed recommendation. Really, the only thing really holding it down is being up tiered so often. But if you can get past that aspect, this is a ship that I consider somewhat unique, very powerful, and in the upcoming commander rework, I expect this thing to become quite ridiculously hilarious at just sniping targets everywhere on the map. Once again, Wargaming loves the sniping playstyle. They seem to be encouraging it everywhere. We've tried to convince them otherwise, but you play the game as they want it. That's fundamentally how it works. So Florida gets a bit of a hesitant recommendation, but still my recommendation. At number 4, I have the Lenin, the Soviet Tier 8 premium battleship. Now, unlike the higher tier Soviet battleships, don't expect this thing to have anything in terms of AA. The AA is very underwhelming. However, the Lenin can manage pretty well without it. The armor is very Soviet indeed. 45mm deck armor, 50mm upper belt. The broadside is vulnerable if you give too much of it, but it also has an icebreaker that is 100mm thick. It also has Soviet damage con, which of course means that this combined with the 50mm plating makes this ship incredibly hard to effectively burn. It shatters the majority of the HE, and as you can see, the superstructure is very small on top of the ship as well. So when it comes to eating HE or angled pens, even if you're the likes of a Yamato or a Musashi that can overmatch the 32mm upper nose, you still struggle to deal any sort of effective damage to the ship. So in terms of tankiness, as long as you maintain angling, it is very strong. The turrets have a long reload, 33 seconds. The AP penetration is good at close range, but it actually falls off very, very quickly. You start off having better pen than the likes of Vladivostok and North Carolina at close range, but the further out you go, the worse the penetration gets. In fact, at 15 kilometers, you actually have worse penetration than the German 380mm guns. So long range is kind of out of the question, especially because you also have Soviet dispersion, which means that your dispersion gets exponentially worse compared to the other lines the further away you are shooting. This means, of course, close range is where you want to be, and you don't want to brawl because of the exposed citadel, but this kind of distance that I'm showcasing here is kind of optimal, and pushing in the Lenin is a joy, because the turret traverse is very fast. It's 26.9 seconds, and you have 406mm guns, and more importantly, they're all facing forward. So in this case, you can see I can easily switch between the Kansas and the Musashi whenever I want, because, well, all three guns are pointed forward, and with the fast turret traverse, I can angle against which one I want and use the guns on the other without having to worry about turning all my guns around. This is one of the features that makes the Lenin so powerful. Add in the fact that you can actually use the third turret without exposing much broadside at all. There is a weakness if you give too much of the nose. You can actually have a bit of a nose citadel weakness, just like the Musashi or the Yamato, but you can keep the angle very tight and still utilize all three of your turrets, which makes this ship extremely frustrating to deal with when it's pushing in the way I am right here. And the turret traverse does allow you to keep your guns on target even in close range situations like that. Obviously you want to avoid the full drive-by because of the citadel weakness, but the power is absolutely there. The speed, not exactly impressive, as I'm trying to outrun these torpedoes, 28.5 knots, but hey, you're not as slow as the Americans, so you do have that going for you. The concealment is 13.1 kilometers, which is, it's kind of just average, that's really it. The Lenin makes the list because the Lenin is exceptionally good at one thing, and basically all its tools synergizes extremely well at one thing, and that is pushing in and taking the fight to the enemy. It has the icebreaker, which means that this guy can't even citadel me. He can overmatch my nose, but he can't citadel me. You can run the likes of Kuznetsov on him, which gives you that additional heal and better dispersion in case of brawling situations. And close range, the AP is absolutely murderous with that Soviet dispersion that gives you that punching power at close range. You're quick to switch targets, you can shoot on whichever side of the ship you want. This thing is designed to take the fight to the enemy. And of course, all that armor means that even something like, well, the majority of the HE will struggle. In this case, of course, we are facing an Alaska, which actually does have the capacity to pen the deck and the upper belt armor. But even he will not have a fun time fighting against the ship because, well, as you can see, if he's hitting too much of that exposed citadel, his HE is just shattering, and there's not a whole lot of superstructure to hit. There is one weakness though, and that is that stern. That booty is basically square, and if you do land shells on it, it's a very nice place to get those full pens and cause a lot of damage. So Lenin, great at pushing in, but if you're forced into a kiting situation, you're no longer using your icebreaker but your stern, well, suddenly you start eating significantly more damage and the tankiness goes down heavily. Regardless, for tier 8, the Lenin is incredibly strong and deserves its place on my list. As the 7th ship on my list, I have the Soviet cruiser Stalingrad. Well, battle cruiser, and calling it battle cruiser is certainly stretching it. The thing is absurdly tanky, having 72.4k health and 50mm plating on both the deck and the upper belt, and including a 50mm icebreaker, which means that you can push aggressively into enemy battleships. The AA is good. I would say good compared to much else that we have. If you do want to get killed by something, if a carrier wants to kill you, you won't be able to stop him, but the AA is 6.6 km range, and you do have defensive AA, mostly because you're forced to spec it. You cannot switch to hydro in this ship. It handles very poorly. The turning circle is absolutely gigantic at 1,130 meters with a fairly poor rudder shift, but the ship is incredibly fast at 36.8 knots, and honestly having this hunk of steel rushing you down can be an awkward experience. If you give broadside in the thing, however, you will get punished, the citadel armor is only 180 millimeters, and the Stalingrad citadel is very large. So this is very much a nose-in or nose-out kind of push or kite kind of cruiser. You don't want to get caught in any sort of brawls in this thing unless you can angle against whatever you are brawling, which generally doesn't happen. No, the main gimmick of the Stalingrad is what you've been seeing, and that is the guns. I've often considered the Stalingrad guns to basically be the best guns in the game, and that is because they have all the features that you could only dream of. The incredible dispersion is thanks to the 2.65 sigma that these guns have, and the ability that I have to constantly penetrate all the targets that I'm shooting is thanks to the penetration. Even though it only has 9 305mm guns that do 9.2k alpha, the guns have roughly the equivalent penetration of the North Carolina, that is North Carolina the battleship, the same penetration as those guns. This means that if, for example, this Vladivostok that is giving me too much broadside, I can confidently push in and citadel him, and thanks to the armor, I also know that I can push into these ships, because as long as I'm not giving broadside to anything, they will struggle to take me down. Keep in mind though that this thing does suffer from 60-second fires, unlike normal cruiser 30-second fires, and in the upcoming Commander rework you will not be able to spec fire prevention, which will reduce the survivability of the Stalingrad quite significantly. However, there are some skills like, for example, the 7% increased AP damage that you can spec, and 8% improved reload on any target within your detectability range. And Stalingrad detectability is one of the worst of all cruisers, so that will synergize extremely well. There are, however, other features to these guns than merely the sigma, the penetration, and the incredible shell velocity. These guns also have a short fuse. The fuse is that determines when the shell arms inside a ship, and thanks to the exceptionally short fuse on the Stalingrad shells, even though they are so ridiculously fast, they can arm on light cruisers that normally, while battleships tend to merely overpen, the Stalingrad can consistently punish. It is also capable of overmatching both the bow and the stern, so smokes cruisers like Smolensk or Minotaurs, Edinburghs, Neptunes can be radared, overmatched, and easily deleted thanks to this combination of shell velocity and sigma and faster shell arming time or short fuse time. The short fuse time also has other advantages. If you shoot a target that you're not able to citadel, you'll just get a bunch of pens. So this means that the shells are extremely consistent, and the damage output when you're shooting anything that gives you anything resembling a broadside, you will do significant damage. And a Stalingrad chasing you down is not a fun experience. But there is still more to the guns. They also have the improved penetration angles. They have 55 to 65 degree improved penetration angles, so if you don't give enough angling, like this Moskva, who thinks he's safe, the improved pen angles allows these guns to punch through even angled plating and citadeled moderately angled ships. If a Stalingrad is shooting you, you have to give it your full attention, because if you don't, he will probably punish you. And finally, it's not like the HE is bad either. Combined with the radar, the fast shell velocity, and the sigma, it means that if a Stalingrad does catch a DD within its radar, 4.5k HE alpha hurts significantly, and it is not a fun experience for the destroyer, because regardless of dodging and angling, these shells at close range are nigh impossible to dodge, and they hit like an absolute truck, as this poor Holland found out. That is why Stalingrad was on my previous list, and that is why Stalingrad will continue to be on my list. In the 9th place, I have the Soviet battleship Slava. A battleship that I actually expect to improve in the upcoming Commander rework, and a battleship that can shoot the Moskva 21 kilometers away using only his 2 front turrets, and land 6 out of 6 shells with 4 citadels in the process. Slava stands out because of its incredible consistency. I have by far the highest hit rate of any battleship in the Slava. I think it is 42%. And Slava's guns are basically completely exceptional. There are no other guns like this in the game. The way Stalingrad guns stand out from other cruisers, Slava guns stand out from other battleships. The guns are only 406 millimeters, so you should not be expecting to overmatch, since you can be angled against, and the HE isn't really that impressive. But I've been told repeatedly, well, Slava isn't that good because you can angle against it, and then I play the game, and people actually don't angle. The simple fact is that in World of Warships, people give a lot of broadside, and any ship that can consistently punish those broadsides is incredibly powerful. And that is Slava, and that is especially Slava in random battles, where people give far too much broadside, and Slava's guns are capable of citadeling any ship. I mean any ship. And, well, not, okay, never mind, not any, not destroyers. But for example, Kremlins that are usually exceptionally tanky, or ships that are just stupidly far away and you don't actually expect to hit them, Slava can pull it off, and Slava can hit them. And that is why Slava is going to be on this list, because if they actually do include that new upcoming skill called Marksman, that gives you 10% improved dispersion at range, Slava is going to be right at home. And there is a reason for this. When I say that Slava guns stand out, I really need to show you the chart. This is every single tier 10 battleship in the game. This is Vermont, this is Thunder, this is Ohio. These are all the big guns, all the tier 10 battleship guns in the game, including even Shikishima. That blue thick line, that's Slava's penetration graph. That thin blue line above, that's Slava's shell travel time through the air towards its target. Slava has 580, more than 580 millimeters of pen at 20 kilometers, and the shells are the fastest to get there. This means that if the upcoming change goes through, which means that, well, if any of you played PTS, basically all the battleships were testing the new marksman skill, and it seems incredibly powerful, and I'm probably going to be speccing it on a bunch of my battleships. It means that the meta is going to turn into even more sniping. And Slava is the quintessential sniping battleship. I'd probably put Thunder up here with it thanks to its HE overmatch, but Thunder isn't available anymore. Well, it's not going to be available in a month anymore, so that means Slava is our choice. Slava has its weaknesses. I mean, I'd say it has a vulnerable broadside, but it's Kremlin hull, which means that mostly sounds like a joke. It does, however, have 25mm nose and stern. You can't actually overmatch them. There's hidden plates inside, which means you cannot be citadeled through either, but you can be overmatched and you can be penned. The AA is really strong, which kind of really helps its playstyle of sitting very far back and even sometimes sitting alone. It has one less heal. Potentially you might lose another heal depending on how you spec it in the upcoming commander rework. But it does have a lot of health, and it actually has a 150mm upper belt. So an angled Slava is still quite a tanky ship and quite a hard ship to deal with. Slava's guns is the reason why this ship stands out, and regardless of, I wouldn't say in a competitive mode that Slava has ever been recommended, but because, well, there's actually good players that will angle, but in random battles, if people angle, it's usually to give you more broadside. And Slava is the #1 battleship in the game when it comes to punishing those broadsides. That's why Slava, once again, makes my list with absolute ease. As my final recommendation, well, I actually kind of struggled. I mean, if this was a top list of the best ships, I would probably pick the FDR, the Franklin Roosevelt, the carrier. It's basically horrendously overpowered. It's a tier 10 carrier that ignores AA and hits like an absolute truck. But considering I hate CVs, I instead decided I'll add 2 ships that I think are very good and which I think will do very well in the future. The first of them is Roma. Roma is stupidly stealthy. You can see I just snuck in basically into the middle of the map because my concealment is 11.7. It also has a fantastic armor model, and the AP penetration on these 380mm guns is really absurd. The AA is weak, however, and honestly the greatest weakness that the Roma has is that the gun dispersion is very poor. However, keep in mind that the commander skill rework is coming, and that marksman skill, the idea of the marksman skill is that it increases the accuracy of the main battery guns if no one is within your detectability range. So that means Roma, by speccing that, mitigates one of its greatest weaknesses, the horrendously poor dispersion. and thanks because it has such good conceal, it can benefit from this all the way at 12 kilometers away. So Roma, I think, was going to really like the captain's skill rework, because it will help it with one of the greatest weaknesses, and it's not like the ship is bad as it is. I already enjoy playing the Roma thanks to the tankiness and just the general playstyle. And if you're looking for a moneymaker, Roma with this Kobayashi camo is actually one of the best moneymakers in the entire game when it comes to farming credits. So Roma does get my kind of tentative, but fairly confident recommendation. The other ship I like to recommend is the USS Kidd. It is a Fletcher hull with one less set of torpedoes, but it does have access to heal. And whereas the Roma is perhaps better suited for random battles, because, well, gun consistency, we'll see how much that changes in the upcoming commander skill rework, the Kidd, on the other hand, is an exceptional destroyer for competitive. Very long duration American smoke, good gunpowder because it's a Fletcher, good stealth as well, exceptionally agile, and the ability to basically dip in, take gunfights with enemy destroyers, secure a kill for your team, and then disengage thanks to the heal with largely the majority of your health intact. Even though it only has one set of torpedoes, if you do line them up properly, they do hit quite hard, and of course landing torpedoes is always a good start to taking down any battleship, because it forces damage con, and most of the time your team will be focusing them. The shell arcs are dreadful, honestly, it's American, but if you do get to shoot broadsides, the AP does pump out some decent DPM and will help in taking down those big targets. Overall, Kidd is a strong destroyer. Add in the fact that it actually has pretty good AA. I'm not gonna say amazing, we're not talking Holland levels or Östergötland levels, but the AA combined, especially with defensive AA, thanks to the accuracy of the flak, means that carriers who aren't looking out for the flak and flies into them, like our friend here, will end up losing their entire squadron. Overall, Kidd gets my recommendation because when it comes to an all-rounder, Kidd fills that role very well. It provides smoke cover for the team, it provides spotting, it provides firepower, torpedo power, and thanks to the heal it has a lot of sustain, and thanks to the defensive AA it is also not entirely vulnerable to enemy carrier strikes. This was my recommended list. Okay, we ended up going to 11 instead of 10, even though it says top 10 in the title. I guess clickbait flawless. I hope you guys enjoyed it, as always. If you feel like dropping a sub, I do appreciate the support. This video ended up being really stupidly long, much longer than I had planned, but I did want to include enough basic information about all the ships to help you guys make up your mind which one suits your playstyle the best. There are some ships that I mentioned are harder to play than others, and I hope you don't take it as discouraging, because learning to play those ships can be extremely satisfying, and there can be a certain satisfaction in knowing that the reason that you're doing poorly, for example, in a ship, isn't because the ship is bad. You're well aware that you're playing a good ship, you just need to figure out how to make it work. Some people find satisfaction in it. I sometimes find when I see someone recommend a ship that I considered terrible, taking the time to learn to improve in it does make it much more satisfying to play than ships that you kind of pick up on the first try. That depends on the person though. Still though, at this point I am ranting, mostly because, well, these guys are hunting me. I just want to give you a little spoiler. No, they do not manage to kill me, even with all the plane spotting, because, as I mentioned, Kidd is an agile, nimble little beast, and the Kaga doesn't want to spend too much time spotting me because of the AA, and as long as you don't shoot and give yourself too much bloom, you can actually dip out into cover surprisingly easily. Very strong ship. Have a great rest of the day, evening, morning, whatever it is, or at your place. Later, my dudes.